Welcome to one of the creepiest and most messed up stories ever found in Alexandria history. Before we get started, I want you to drop in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right there where you are. We really want to know which places and what times of day or night people are tuning in to hear stories like this. So it was the year 1835 when a family called the Brants moved into their new house on Duke Street in Alexandria, Virginia, a simple two-story brick house just 8 blocks away from the busy docks along the Potomac River. This guy Isaiah Brant had come all the way from Baltimore with his brand new wife Clementine, who used to be Clementine Morel, the daughter of a French businessman who had moved to Maryland about 30 years before. Isaiah had bought the house from an old tobacco seller who told him the house got lots of sunlight from the south and had a deep basement, which would be just perfect for Isaiah's plan to set himself up as a big-time merchant in this growing port city. What made the deal even sweeter was the building right next to the house, a skinny 3-story structure with tiny windows and its own separate door leading to the back alley. Isaiah called this the annex in his letters to his brother in Philadelphia, and he planned to use it as housing for the 5 enslaved people the Brants had brought with them from Baltimore, a married couple in their 40s, their 22-year-old daughter, a 30-year-old male worker, and an older woman who cooked for the family. Their names were written down only as property in Isaiah's record book, but in her personal letters Clementine did call the cook by her name, Martha. The Duke Street house was in a part of Alexandria where both free black people and enslaved black people lived, along with several businesses that were involved in the slave trade. Just 3 blocks away was the super infamous Franklin and Armfield slave pen, one of the biggest slave trading operations in the entire country. In 1835, Alexandria was actually part of Washington, D.C., and its whole economy was deeply tied to both ocean shipping and the buying and selling of enslaved people. Looking at tax records from the spring of 1835, Isaiah said he was a business agent dealing in tobacco and cotton, with connections all around Virginia and the Carolinas. His business looked totally normal and legitimate, with regular shipments written down at the Alexandria Custom House. But those same records had some really weird problems, ships coming in from Baltimore and leaving for New Orleans, but the lists of what was on board didn't match what was actually declared. The first weird thing that happened at the Brant house was mentioned in a letter Clementine wrote to her sister back in August of 1835. She said she kept hearing strange noises coming from the basement, like furniture being dragged around, even though there was no furniture down there, and she described this heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to hang in the air after the sound stopped. Isaiah brushed her off and said the old house was just settling, or maybe it was rats in the walls. A record book found among Isaiah's papers shows that by September, he had done some major work on the basement, including adding a brand new door with a really unusual locking system. He paid a craftsman $27 for special ironwork that was described as a secure containment fixture. That same record book also shows payments to a stone cutter for work on the basement floor, though nobody wrote down exactly what that work was. The first time someone officially went missing happened in early October 1835. A notice in the Alexandria Gazette said that a black man, about 30 years old, who was the property of I. Brant, had run away. They offered a $100 reward for bringing him back. But here's the weird part: Isaiah never put out any more notices like people normally did when they lost valuable property. Instead, his business ledger just wrote loss of asset and subtracted the man's dollar value from his accounts. By November, Clementine had started writing in a private journal, which wasn't discovered until 123 years later when someone was renovating the property in 1958. In it, she wrote about how more and more worried she was getting about her husband's business. She wrote, "He spends most evenings in his study with the door locked. When he comes out, he's a totally different person, cold and distant. He barely says anything at dinner and goes straight to bed after. This house feels like a tomb." In one really disturbing entry from November 23, Clementine wrote, "I heard someone crying from down below after midnight. He said it was just the wind in the chimney, but there was no wind last night." She also wrote that Martha refused to go near the basement anymore and would send the younger girl down for supplies instead, and every time that girl came back up, her face was pale as a ghost. There's a strange document in the city records from December 1835 showing that Isaiah had asked for permission to change the sewer system under his property. The city engineer had some concerns about what Isaiah was proposing, but eventually gave him the green light after Isaiah donated a big chunk of money to a city improvement fund. What happened during the winter of 1835 to 1836 is mostly a blank. There's this strange gap in Clementine's journal from December 27th all the way to February 12th. When she starts writing again, her handwriting looks different, stiffer, and she was pressing the pen much harder into the paper. She doesn't mention the basement sounds anymore, but now she's writing down, totally matter-of-factly, like she's just reading off a list, the names and times of all the men coming to meet with Isaiah, most of them showing up after dark. A court record from March 1836 shows that Isaiah was briefly questioned about a free black man who had been seen near the Brant house and then disappeared. Isaiah brought witnesses who swore he'd been across town at a business meeting when it happened. The whole case was dropped really quickly. By April, Isaiah's business was doing great, bank records show big deposits coming in, and he bought 2 more properties near the waterfront. But the neighbors were starting to notice something was seriously wrong with Clementine. A letter from the wife of a neighboring merchant described her as looking ghostly thin and said she would stand at her window for hours just staring at nothing, and she stopped accepting invitations to tea or church. One of the most telling clues from this whole period is a series of receipts from a local pharmacy. Between April and June of 1836, Isaiah was buying more and more laudanum, which he said was for his wife's nerves. But the same pharmacy records also show he was buying some really unusual chemical stuff, potassium permanganate, various acids, and huge amounts of lime. Now, all of those things have perfectly normal household uses, but they're also very well known for getting rid of smells and breaking down organic matter, like, say, a body. In June, another one of the enslaved people from the Brant house was reported to have run away, the 22-year-old woman. Again, Isaiah put out only the most basic notice and made no real effort to get her back. Even creepier is what Clementine wrote in her journal that exact same day, just 8 words. He told me she ran away. The locked door tells a different story. By the middle of summer, Clementine's journal entries start getting really scattered and hard to follow. She writes about passageways under the house and rooms that shouldn't be there. She writes about arguments with Isaiah like this one. I asked him again about the noises. He says I'm imagining things, but he doesn't sleep. He watches me all the time, follows me when I walk in the garden, says he's just worried about my health. Then comes a huge entry from July 18th. Found the key today while he was at the wharves. I went down to the basement alone. God help me for what I saw. The walls have been extended way past where they should be. How far does it go? And the marks on the stone, those lines and numbers, a ledger of souls. I put the key back. He must not know I've been down there. The most threatening document from this whole period is a letter Isaiah wrote to a business partner in Richmond, dated July 25th. In it, he talks about growing his operation and needing special accommodations for merchandise in transit. He asks for information about ships leaving for the Caribbean with captains who would be willing to move unusual cargo with no paperwork. On August 2, 1836, almost exactly 1 year after the Brants moved to Alexandria, the city's night watchman reported seeing something suspicious at the Duke Street property. His notes describe lights moving in the basement windows way past midnight and sounds like someone was digging or scraping. He went to check it out, but the doors were all locked, nobody answered his knocking, and since Isaiah Brant was considered a respectable businessman, the watchman just walked away. The records go quiet for 3 days. Then on August 6th, a fire breaks out at the Brant house. By the time the fire crew got there, most of the main house was already burning. The annex next door, where the enslaved people lived, didn't burn at all. The Alexandria Gazette reported the next day that Isaiah and Clementine Brant's bodies were found in the ruins. The official cause of death was listed as suffocation from smoke. The 3 enslaved people still living there were taken by Isaiah's brother, who came from Philadelphia about a week later to sort out the estate. The basement, incredibly, survived the fire mostly in one piece. City engineers who came in to check the property noticed major changes to the original building. Walls had been moved, the floor had been dug up to make deeper levels, and a narrow tunnel seemed to go all the way toward the nearby Potomac River. The report mentioned signs of recent activity but gave no details. The property sat empty for nearly 10 years before a shipping merchant bought it, knocked down what was left, and built a new warehouse. While digging, workers reportedly found weird stuff in the basement, iron restraints and specialized tools that nobody could figure out the purpose of right away. According to what one worker told a local minister, there were also markings on the walls, names and dates scratched into the stone. None of this was officially written down anywhere, and construction just kept going without stopping. maybe the most chilling piece of the whole Brant puzzle showed up 22 years later. In 1858, a former slave trader named Thomas Wilson made a deathbed confession to a Methodist minister in New Orleans. Wilson said he had done business with a man from the north in Alexandria who had built a secret underground holding place where he stashed people before smuggling them away for illegal sale to plantations in the Caribbean. Wilson described a seriously sophisticated operation, one that moved enslaved people completely outside the already minimal paperwork required by law, essentially a full-on human trafficking ring that skipped even the thin legal records that normally existed. He talked about a modified basement where people were held for sometimes weeks at a time before being moved through a tunnel to waiting ships in the dark of night. The most disturbing part of Wilson's confession was his claim that the guy running the whole thing had figured out ways to break people's will using a mix of chemicals and psychological tricks. Wilson said that the people who made it through this preparation came out like living ghosts, totally hollowed out, who would do whatever they were told without a single word of resistance. The minister wrote down everything Wilson confessed but was so disturbed by it that he locked it away. It wasn't found until 1963 when someone was going through old church records. Historians who studied the confession were stunned. The details matched perfectly with the renovations made to the Brant basement, details Wilson had absolutely no way of knowing unless he'd actually been there. In 1958, during city renovation projects in Old Alexandria, workers digging near the old Brant property found a narrow tunnel running from where the basement would have been all the way toward the old wharf area. Inside the tunnel they found some artifacts, a woman's shoe that looked like it was from the 1830s, a key with an unusual shape, and most tellingly, a small leather-bound book. Water had destroyed most of it, but a few pages showed what looked like a list of names with dates and dollar amounts, a ledger of human cargo. Scientists who tested the soil in and around the tunnel found traces of chemicals that matched what Isaiah had bought from the pharmacy in 1836. Even more disturbing were the really high amounts of lime in the soil, a substance people in that era commonly used to cover up smells and speed up the breakdown of organic matter. The most unsettling discovery came when workers removed a section of the original basement wall and found a small hidden space containing Clementine's complete journal. The final entries one's historians had never seen before paint the picture of a woman pushed to desperate action. Her entry from August 5, 1836, the day before the fire, reads, "I have seen everything now. The tunnel, the chains, the room where they are changed. I found the missing pages from Isaiah's ledger." Not merchandise people, dozens of them, their names, their prices, their destinations, and the special notes on the procedures performed. God forgive him, God forgive me for my silence, there is only one way to end this. The final entry, dated August 6, simply says, "The lamp will fall tonight, the fire will cleanse what cannot be redeemed. I have sealed this journal where flames cannot reach. Someone must know what happened here, someone must remember them." Fire investigators who reviewed the case in 1960 noted that the burn pattern from the 1836 fire was totally consistent with an oil lamp being tipped over on purpose in the master bedroom, exactly as Clementine had planned. In 1968, the last major document connected to the Brant mystery turned up. A ship's cargo list from August 1836, found in a collection of maritime records in New Orleans, listed goods transported from Alexandria. Hidden inside the normal cargo list was a coded section that, when decoded using clues found in Isaiah's business papers, revealed the transport of 9 unnamed items with values that lined up with human trafficking prices of the time. That cargo list was dated August 4th, 2 days before the fire destroyed the Brant home. Today, where the Brant house once stood is just a modern office building. A small historical marker says only that the site was once home to merchant Isaiah Brant and his wife Clementine, who died in a fire in 1836. Nothing is left of the basement, the tunnel, or the evidence of what went on there, except in old records and in the memories of people who make sure histories like this are not forgotten. For decades, workers in buildings put up on that same spot have reported weird cold spots, especially in basement areas, and unexplained sounds like distant crying or the scraping of metal against stone. Engineers keep checking and keep finding no structural reason for any of it. What's more concrete are the little artifacts that keep turning up during construction nearby: a button, a coin, a fragment of chain, small echoes of lives that were interrupted. Each one gets cataloged, each story gets preserved as Alexandria faces the darker chapters of its past. The most bizarre mystery in Alexandria's slave-era history is still only partly solved. While the historical evidence strongly points to Isaiah Brandt running an illegal human trafficking operation out of his Duke Street property, plenty of questions still don't have answers. How many people actually passed through that basement? Who were Brandt's other partners besides Thomas Wilson? And what exactly was the procedure mentioned in his hidden records? What does seem more and more clear from the historical record is that Clementine Brandt, who at first just stood by in silence, eventually decided to put a stop to the operation the only way she could think of, by sacrificing herself along with her husband in a fire she hoped would wipe out all evidence of the horrors that had taken place under her home. Maybe the true horror of the Brandt mystery isn't really about ghostly cold spots or mysterious sounds, it's about the very human ability to be both deeply cruel and deeply brave. Isaiah Brandt built a house of horrors behind a perfectly respectable front. Clementine, through her final act, tried to bring some form of justice when every legal and social system of her time would have let her down. The echoes of their story, and more importantly, the stories of those who suffered and disappeared in that basement, keep rippling through Alexandria's history, a reminder of a darkness that once thrived out in the open and of the courage it takes to face it. Some local historians have suggested that the Brandt case, though especially well documented because of Clementine's preserved journal, might be just one example of similar operations that existed all over the region during that time. The tunnel discovered at the Brandt property looks strikingly similar to passages found at other locations along the Potomac, suggesting there might have been a whole network of illegal operations like this. In 1967, an elderly woman came forward saying her great-grandmother had been held in what she called a devil's cellar in Alexandria before escaping during a fire. Her description of the place and the operation matched details from the Brandt case that hadn't been made public yet, which gave her story a lot of credibility and suggested that at least one person may have gotten out during the chaos of the fire. As Alexandria keeps digging up its past, literally and figuratively, the Duke Street story stays as a haunting reminder that history's most disturbing chapters are often just below the surface, waiting to be found by whoever is willing to look past the official story. And on quiet nights, some people say that if you stand on the corner of Duke Street, right where the Brandt house used to be, you can still hear a faint scraping sound from below, like furniture being moved, even though there's nothing there to move. In 1969, a graduate student researching the domestic slave trade found a broken letter in the files of a Baltimore bank where Isaiah Brandt used to do his banking. The letter, dated July 1836, was addressed to a ship's captain and had coded instructions for a meetup at the Alexandria wharf. What made this document especially disturbing was a casual little note at the end, where Brandt wrote, "The procedure continues to prove effective. The merchandise from last month has been delivered successfully without any incident or resistance, not a single word spoken during the whole trip." This mention of the procedure lined up with earlier references in Isaiah's hidden records and with Thomas Wilson's deathbed confession. Historians and medical experts who looked at all the available evidence in 1972 came up with a theory that Isaiah had developed a chemical way of putting his victims into a kind of disconnected mental state, combining laudanum with other stuff he'd bought from the pharmacy to create a drug that made people obedient and silent. The physical evidence backs this up. When workers dug out the tunnel in 1958, soil samples showed traces of opium-based substances and chemical compounds that, when mixed together, would produce effects similar to what we'd recognize today as a chemically induced traumatic dissociative state. In plain terms, Isaiah Brandt seemed to be working on primitive chemical mind control techniques to make his human merchandise easier to move and less likely to fight back or escape. One record book entry from June 1836, partially saved from water damage, contains this note: "Procedure refined. Subject remains functional but compliant for approximately 14 days. Memory impairment noted. Vocalization completely suppressed. Value increased by 40%. This means Brandt wasn't just trafficking enslaved people. He was actively doing experiments on them to make them more valuable by chemically breaking their minds, leaving them unable to resist, unable to remember, and unable to speak about what had been done to them. The merchandise in transit, he kept mentioning in his business letters, were real human beings who had been chemically turned into, as one historian later put it, walking ghosts." What's less clear is how Clementine went from someone who looked the other way to someone who actively fought back against her husband's operation. Her journal entries show her waking up slowly to what was happening under her home. Early on, she seems to believe Isaiah's explanations for the weird sounds and activities. By the middle of the journal, she's writing about growing suspicion, but also fear, both of the truth and of her husband, who she noticed had become watchful and suspicious and was sleeping with the basement key tucked under his pillow. One especially revealing entry from June 1836 reads, "I was called away unexpectedly today. Martha says she heard crying from below. I pretended not to hear her. What kind of woman have I become that I pretend not to hear crying coming from beneath my own floors? I am a coward. Every day I stay silent makes me more and more guilty." By July, Clementine had clearly started doing her own investigating. An entry from July 10th describes how she followed Isaiah to the wharves one night, wearing his coat with her hair hidden, keeping to the shadows. She watched him meet with a ship's captain and caught bits of conversation about special cargo and private transportation. On July 12th, she writes about finding financial papers in Isaiah's study showing payments far too large to come from any legitimate business. "Where does all this money come from?" she writes. "And these payments to captains, to doctors, to guards, what kind of merchandise needs handling like this?" The turning point came on July 18th when she found and used the basement key. She doesn't flat out say what she saw, but the entry from that day shows a dramatic change. Her neat, controlled handwriting becomes shaky and full of ink blobs and crossed-out words. She writes only, "Souls, God help me, he is trading in souls, and not just trading, changing them, breaking them." The empty eyes of the woman chained to the wall, I will never forget. She looked at me but didn't see me. What has he done to her? What has he done to all of them? What have I allowed? From that point on, Clementine's entries show her making a plan. She starts writing down Isaiah's schedule, noticing patterns in his movements and when his business partners show up. She writes about hiding small amounts of money and gathering supplies, lamp oil, matches, a small knife she hid in her sewing basket. On July 25th, she writes, "I thought about going to the authorities today. Then I remembered who they are, men like Isaiah, men who eat dinner at our table, who tip their hats to me on the street, who profit from the same trade. There will be no justice from that direction. Maybe there can be no justice at all, only an end." A chilling entry from July 30th reads, "Counted the bottles in Isaiah's cabinet today while he was out. Enough laudanum to put the entire household into an eternal sleep. That would be the gentle way, but I am not feeling gentle anymore." Church records from Alexandria show that during this period Clementine started going to services way more often. The minister's diary notes that she was deeply interested in discussions about damnation and redemption, and that she specifically asked for private counseling about the sin of doing nothing in the face of evil, and whether God forgives people who failed to act. On August 2nd, she writes about hearing the night watchman outside while Isaiah was working in the basement. "For a moment," she writes, "I thought about screaming, pounding on the window, begging for help. But what then? Maybe a scandal, maybe a fine. He would buy his way out like he always does, and those below would still be lost. No, it must end completely." The entries for August 3rd and 4th are short and almost eerily calm. She writes about everyday things, telling Martha about dinner, mending one of Isaiah's shirts, putting flowers in a vase from the garden. Knowing what we know now about what she was planning, these totally normal little notes are incredibly haunting, the final performance of a normal life before her desperate act. Her second-to-last entry on August 5th describes her final discovery, a hidden compartment in Isaiah's desk containing what she calls the true ledger. This document was never recovered, but it apparently showed the full picture of Isaiah's operation, including names and destinations of everyone who had passed through his basement, and detailed descriptions of the procedure used to subdue them. "Now I know everything," she writes. "The scale is bigger than I ever imagined, not dozens, hundreds. Over 4 years, first in Baltimore, now here, and others involved, respected men, pillars of society, merchants and doctors and ship captains. A massive web of misery with Isaiah at the center, getting rich off suffering he creates with his own hands. There is no authority to appeal to, no justice to be found within the system that allows such things. The system itself is the crime." Her final entry on August 6th, the day of the fire, is her confession and her reason for doing what she did. "The lamp will fall tonight, the fire will cleanse what cannot be redeemed. I have sealed this journal where flames cannot reach." Someone must know what happened here, someone must remember them. Fire department records confirm the blaze started just after midnight on August 6th. By the time help arrived, the main house was completely on fire. The The report says it looked like the fire started in the master bedroom and spread fast, likely because of lamp oil or other flammable stuff. The bodies of Isaiah and Clementine Brandt were found in their bed. But the medical examiner's notes, discovered in 1973 and oddly left out of the official report, contained a detail that changes everything. While Isaiah's body showed signs of smoke inhalation, meaning he was alive when the fire started, Clementine's body showed no signs of smoke inhalation. Instead, the examiner noted evidence that she had taken a large amount of laudanum, meaning she was likely already dead before the flames even reached her. This suggests Clementine may have taken her own life with the laudanum before she set the fire, making sure her plan would go through even if she lost her nerve at the last second. It was her final act of resistance against both her husband and her own silence. What about the people who were being held in the basement when the fire happened? History is mostly quiet on their fate. The tunnel leading to the Potomac offers one possibility, that some of them may have escaped during the chaos of the fire. The 1967 account in which an elderly woman said her great-grandmother had escaped from a devil's cellar in Alexandria during a fire offers some fragile support for this idea. Physical evidence from the 1958 excavation showed that the basement itself suffered pretty minor damage in the fire. The stone walls and floor were mostly fine. Fire crew reports from that night show they focused on keeping the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings rather than trying to save the already fully burning Brandt home. That means anyone held in the basement might have had a chance to get out through the tunnel while everyone was distracted. Isaiah's brother, who came from Philadelphia a week after the fire to settle the estate, told authorities that 3 enslaved people registered to Isaiah had survived the fire. They'd been in the annex, which was untouched by the flames. Records show he took them back to Philadelphia, where they completely disappear from history. What happened to them, whether they stayed enslaved, were sold, or maybe even set free, nobody knows. The most haunting questions are about the people who were being held in the basement as part of Isaiah's illegal operation. Thomas Wilson's 1858 deathbed confession claimed that in the 4 years he'd done business with the Alexandria merchant, he had personally arranged transport for no fewer than 60 people who had passed through the basement and gone through the mysterious procedure. If that estimate is right and only covers what Wilson knew directly, the total number of victims over the course of Isaiah's whole operation could have reached into the hundreds, just as Clementine had feared. Because these people were deliberately kept off any official records, kept outside even the already minimal documentation required for enslaved people, there's no official count of how many passed through or what happened to them. The final piece of the Brandt mystery came in 1975 when an architectural historian studying buildings along the Potomac noticed something that had been overlooked before. 3 properties in Alexandria, including the old Brandt house on Duke Street, all had one strange feature in common: basements with walls that had been extended beyond the original foundations, all with access to narrow tunnels going toward the river. All 3 properties had at various points between 1830 and 1850 been owned by merchants with connections to Isaiah Brandt. This discovery added serious weight to the theory that Isaiah wasn't acting alone. He was part of a network of illegal human traffickers hiding their operation behind normal-looking businesses in Alexandria. In 1978, the Alexandria Historical Society put together a big comprehensive study of the Brandt case, bringing together historians, archaeologists, and medical experts to go through all the available evidence. Their report concluded that there was strong evidence Isaiah Brandt ran an illegal human trafficking operation that included chemically subduing his victims, and that Clementine Brandt's decision to burn it all down was likely driven by a moral awakening and the understanding that the legal system would never help her, because of how deeply slavery was woven into everything. The report also put the whole thing in its broader historical context. While the Brandt operation was illegal even by the standards of the time, because it went around the documented domestic slave trade, it only existed because of the larger system of chattel slavery that ran the American economy and society in the years before the Civil War. Isaiah's crime wasn't that he enslaved people, because that was totally legal and protected by law. His crime was doing it outside the established channels that at least kept thin records. That context explains why Clementine felt so hopeless and concluded there was no justice to be found within the system. The very authorities who might have shut down Isaiah's illegal operation were invested in keeping the bigger system of human bondage running. Her journal shows a woman coming to terms not just with her husband's individual crimes, but with her own place inside a fundamentally unjust society. Today, the former Brant property has a small plaque that acknowledges this darker history. It reads, "Near this spot stood the home of Isaiah and Clementine Brant, destroyed by fire in August 1836. Archaeological evidence indicates the property was used for illegal human trafficking. The fire, likely set by Clementine Brant, ended an operation that caused immeasurable suffering." This marker honors the known and unknown victims of this site and serves as a reminder of Alexandria's complex past. Local historians and community activists have worked hard to make sure the Brant case is part of the educational story told about Alexandria's history, especially in discussions about the domestic slave trade and its legacy. The case shows up in several museum exhibits across the city, including a permanent installation at the Alexandria Black History Museum that uses the Brant Cellar as a case study in how archaeology can reveal hidden histories of resistance and survival. The most lasting part of the Brant mystery might be what it shows us about the gap between documented history and lost voices. We have Clementine's journal, Isaiah's business records, and the physical evidence of the basement and tunnel, but we have almost nothing from the people who passed through that space as captives. Their experiences, their names, their fates remain mostly unknown, casualties not just of Isaiah's cruelty, but of a system designed to make them invisible. Yet traces remain in the archaeological record, in scattered mentions in documents, in family histories passed down through generations, like the account of the woman who escaped during the fire. These echoes remind us that behind every historical atrocity are individual human stories of suffering, resistance, and sometimes survival. City officials decided not to do any more excavation, instead marking the area for possible future archaeological work and installing a memorial plaque acknowledging that the full extent of Alexandria's underground history is still yet to be discovered. That's maybe the most fitting ending to the Brant mystery, the recognition that beneath the visible surface of history lies a complex tangle of stories still waiting to be found, and that our understanding of the past keeps changing as new evidence crawls out of the shadows. In 2005, ground-penetrating radar being used during a utility project near the old Brant property picked up underground shapes consistent with additional tunnel structures going even further than what had been found before. The story of Isaiah and Clementine Brant, a story of cruelty, complicity, moral awakening, and desperate action, is a reminder that history's most important lessons often aren't in what's displayed prominently, but in what was deliberately hidden, and that sometimes the most profound acts of courage are about dragging darkness into the light, even when doing so costs everything. As you walk the old cobblestone streets of Alexandria today, past brick buildings that look a lot like the one the Brants lived in, it's worth remembering that beneath these familiar fronts lie stories that haven't been fully told yet, some inspiring, some deeply disturbing, all part of a complicated legacy that keeps shaping how we understand American history. And if, while standing on the corner of Duke Street where the Brant house once stood, you feel a sudden chill, or hear what sounds like a distant scraping from below, maybe it's just the wind moving through the old buildings. Or maybe it's history itself, insisting that we remember what happened here, insisting that we listen to voices that have been silent for far too long.